this recording going for our special Sunday afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. I'm in Los Angeles. If you want to put it in the chat where you're zooming in from, please do that. It's always heartening to see the diversity of the Hindu diaspora and where we're zooming in from. So today's webinar, as you can see on the share screen, is Reconstructing Hindu History with Dr. Raj Vedam. He's joining us. I guess he's already with us. I'll be turning on his camera as I give him an introduction and give you a little background on what we're covering here today. In terms of reconstructing Hindu history, Dr. Raj Vedam is well known, giving talks around the world on a range of issues. But it's really only recently that world history became an important discipline in the West, right? The European project is about constructing world history, emerged from their so-called discovery of lands and people previously unknown to them. It's always amazing to me to think about Mount Everest, right? They named it, and the renaming of history and the whitewashing and erasure is so methodical. Aryan Invasion Theory and so many different things that Dr. Raj Vedam has looked into and shared in his book writings, in his speeches, in his courses at Hindu University of America. And in this webinar, we're going to take a brief journey through Hindu history that examines the evidence emerging in relation to Western narratives in which Hindu civilization was subsumed into a Eurocentric grand narrative. They're trying to tell us our history and how we fit into theirs. But in reality, this is about reconstructing our own history, owning it, sharing it, and letting people know that who we are and what we're about as Hindus. So Dr. Raj Vedam is working at the confluence of applied mathematics, engineering, algorithms, and computer science, and he's using a wide range of tools. I think he'll get into some archaeogenetics, archaeoastronomy, archaeology, and pursuing evidence of knowledge transfers from ancient India to the West, to the whole world. Dr. Raj Vedam has put forward a strong thesis with verifiable facts on the antiquity of the Indian civilization, of the Hindu civilization, and the many discoveries made in ancient India, what we came up with. He has delivered over, as I mentioned, 100 lectures in India and the US on the subject of scientific validation of narratives on history of India, in which he's developed a deep interest and inspired me and I think so many others. Thank you for joining us today. He's conducted a dozen high school teacher training workshops in India on multidisciplinary approach to history. It's so important, the multidisciplinary approach to history. And he's also revised history textbooks from Texas to Telangana. So Dr. Raj Vedam, let me hand it off to you. Happy to be on with you today, sir.
Thank you, Ankur. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. So it's a pleasure once again to address the audience over here at HUA. Let me share my screen. Please tell me when you're able to see my screen.
Yes, and if you could go to full screen mode, and if you have questions, you could put it in the Q&A box. We'll take them after the presentation. You can chat in the chat box if you want, but let's give Dr. Raj Vedam our attention. Off to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you once again. And before I start, Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Pranams to the gurus who have shown us the path, and to the many acharyas and teachers who are showing us the way, and we are learning from their efforts. So my pranams to everybody. So we start with what reconstructing Hindu history is all about. And let me start first with Yajnavalkya's Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and this mantra, everybody knows it over here. It's good to say it here to set the tone for our talk today. So Asatoma Satgamaya, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityoma Amritam Gamaya, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. And the translation, from ignorance lead me to truth, from darkness lead me to light, from death lead me to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. So this clearly has been a civilization for a very long time that exalted seeking truth as the goal of life. We will repeatedly see this theme, how once the goal of life was to seek truth, it was naturally conducive to learning, to knowledge generation, and so on. And it is also pointing to the antiquity of the civilization in a way. And I will expand on this theme as we go along with this talk. What we see today is there are a whole lot of claims and counterclaims on the Indian civilization. And this begs deeper study, and we'd like to seek the truth here, if you'll permit me to say that. And we'd like to I'll first show you what the claims are, and then we will go about saying, how are we going to address some of these things? So at the very offset, I'm talking about problems in Indian history here. We have something called a present day narration and something called evidence based narration, which I'm proposing over here. And the present day narration has got a big distance from the evidence based narration. I call it a credibility gap over here. Evidence shows the Indian civilization is ancient, but the present day narration in textbooks, media, and other places, they position us otherwise. We have been knowledge producers, but we are positioned otherwise. We have very strong index sources and references, but these are ignored, devalued, and discredited in today's discourses. And we see in the evidence of the Indian civilization that there is a continuity of civilization, but in the present day narration, we have enforced periodization. They tell us there's something called Indus Valley civilization, disconnected from everything we know in India and so on. And later on, Aryans came, and so periodization is enforced. But in the evidence, we don't see that. We have very large periods of history which unfortunately have been erased. And this is one of the most egregious examples of what has happened in our history today. We have hundreds of rishis who have created enormous numbers of intellectual works, and those intellectual works have survived to the present day, but these are completely ignored and made irrelevant as if they did not exist. So we are seeing many such problems. Now, the present day narration blames the Hindu social order for the poverty seen in India, but in the evidence we see it's invasions that create poverty. We are told that Indians received knowledge from the Greeks and the Babylonians, but we can show that through evidence the Indian knowledge seeded the world. We are told that we are Aryans and Dravidians and tribal people, but we can show that these are manufactured identities. There's no distinction between Northern, Southern Indian at many levels of reckoning. It's simply not there. Uh, Going further, we see that Vedic Sanskrit is an ancient language, but the present day narration positions something called a hypothetical constructed language called PIE, and it says that was the ancestor from which these languages are derived. And the Rig Veda talks about the river Saraswati, which dried up in 1900 BCE. But we are told that Rig Veda was composed around 1500 BCE, a kind of a paradox over here. And we are also told that Upanishads, Brahmanas, Samhitas are all dated on linguistic basis from 500 BC to 300 current era, owing to the Aryan Invasion Theory. However, in the internal evidence of these texts, we see from the astronomy that there's great antiquity in some of these texts. Again, paradoxical issues over here. And we are also told that Indian civilization impacted all of these cultures, countries, lands to its east, to its north, to the south, and so on, from Japan, China, Philippines, and all these places. However, it did not step 1 foot outside Afghanistan. So once again, we see the paradoxical nature of where the evidence is and what the narration is in Indian history. So in a cartoonish way, here we are in the claims on Indian civilization. We have been a sink. We have been a very good students for a long time, learning from the world. We are told, for example, that math and sciences came from Greece to India. We are told that the Brahmi script, which is the ancestor of all Indian scripts, that came from Aramaic through the Levant. We are told that Sanskrit and the Aryans came from Central Asia into India. We are told the Babylonians taught us astronomy. We are told that Turkic Muslims, they taught us culture, cuisine, architecture, music, and civilization. We are told that the British taught us science, technology, and rational thought. And today there's also some claims that Bhakti came about with Saint Thomas, who apparently landed in Kerala, and that Dravidians are somehow related to the Elamite people who are in Iran. So these are the kind of claims that we have on the Indian civilization. And I'm saying we need some means to evaluate these claims. If the mainstream narration is saying all these things, I put question marks here on the evidence-based narration, because this is what the course is going to address. The course is going to address these claims that we see on the left side over here, which I'm calling mainstream narration. And I'm saying that with a question mark, is it out of India rather than into India Aryan invasion? Did Indian thought impact the East and the West? Is it ancient or is it recent? then did Indian thought borrow from the Greeks and Babylonians, or did we seed their own thought systems? Are the identities manufactured? Is it the Vedic culture responsible for poverty, or invasions responsible for widespread poverty? So these are some of the issues that we discuss in the course. And like I said, anybody can come with an opinion. We must have some basis to evaluate these opinions, and that is where we are bringing in evidence, trying to analyze the evidence from a variety of fields and trying to see where we are going with this. So, as a scientist and engineer, I rely on analytical framework to evaluate opinions. If somebody comes with claims, then we need some mechanism to evaluate those claims. So I tend to see things in the context of data. What is the data that you have? What is the provenance of the data? Can we examine the kind of quality of the data, relevance, and so on? What are the kind of models that you're constructing with that data? Are those models valid? What is the region of extension of the model? Where will it fail? Where are the corner cases for this model? Then the methods. Once you have data and methods, what are the methods you've applied to get the model, or some extrapolations you propose to make with these models? Are those valid? So these are the things that I study in my career, and that's what I'm applied to the history narratives over here using these frameworks. So we have got a boatload of data when it comes to India. In the history, we got data from archaeology, from genetics, climate records, epigraphy, literature, oral records, foreign travelers, science, script, grammar, language, astronomy, paleontology, religion, philosophy, arts, you name it, this whole lot of data from various fields. And we also have different models that people have used. The earliest models with the linguistic model, and this unfortunately has taken the position of received wisdom, which people don't question anymore. So the linguistic model has been used. Archaeology model is used to fortify that. Today we're seeing genetics model coming and fortifying these two narratives. But we also have several other models that have been neglected, the astronomy model and other models that I'll talk about. In general, a good model should explain the context multidimensionally, because our reality is not unidimensional. Reality is non-linearly explained, and it is also multidimensional in context. So we should be able to use the proposed model to explain the context, and it should also be used to predict, to fill the gaps. If we don't have a certain period of history, the model should be good enough to predict what that history might have been. Those are all the contours of a good model. If the model does not describe some of the data or the evidence that we have, a red flag must go up. And the red flag, we must ask, what is wrong? Is the data wrong? Are the models wrong? Are the methods wrong? Where did we go wrong with this? So that is the kind of analysis that we need to apply ourselves to over here. So like I said, we have linguistics, archaeology, genetics, a lot of data with various fields and methods compared to linguistics, carbon dating, relative chronology, celestial calendars, ice age records, records of drought, earthquakes, river courses, genetics, admixture, PCA, genealogies, internal evidence, eyewitness reconstructions. So many different kinds of narratives and methods can be applied in the data, where we are mapping the past to the present with some time narrative trajectories. So here I ask these questions. Is the received wisdom of loudest voices, is that correct? Because today we are seeing that the academia and the media and certain vested interests have got the loudest voices. They control the discourse of the last 200 years. So is that received wisdom correct? If one needs to reconstruct history exactly, unfortunately, we need a time machine to go to the past and see what really happened. And even that might not be possible. So the next best thing that we can do is have a logical, rational examination to see where is the maximal data converging. If there's a crisscrossing from various disciplines in certain periods of time, that is where we probably can rationally say, this is what I can reconstruct from what we have. There is no over-reliance on only one data, ignoring all the other contra evidence from other fields, but one tries to see where is the best analysis that we can have from all the data that we have. That is what we go towards in this course. So models, constraint, implications. Today, like I said, received wisdom is the Proto-Indo-European linguistic model for the spread of the Indo-European languages. This proposes a homeland for these people in Central Asia, perhaps about 3000 BC, 4000 BC, and so on. And these people spread through Europe as well as to India. And As a consequence of this model, we have Aryan invasion or migration to India in 1500 BC from Central Asia. And as an implication of this, Sanskrit and Hinduism is an import. And as a secondary consequence, the so-called Dravidians who were chased from Harappa to southern India are separate people. So today, a lot of people talk that genetics is giving the final word in these things and in the narration of who we are and these kind of things. And we have to question that. We have to question that to see what are the methods of genetics. We see that genetics makes use of constraints from linguistics. Because it's making use of generation constraints from genetics, from linguistics, it is not an independent line of evidence. Evidence is made to fit the linguistic model. It's a circular logic. We have a whole lot of evidence that does not fit the received wisdom of a linguistic model from astronomy, archaeology, oral literary works, climate records, and so on. And so this gives us the impetus to study the evidence, methods, data in greater detail, and that's what we do here. When we talk about the history of India, we see the historiography. Historiography refers to how was history written in India. For the longest time, Indians have been happy with the kind of history they have. They've got obviously many epics, the Puranas, the Itihasas, which talk a lot about history, Sthala Puranas, and the genealogies contained in Puranas. This has been our history for the longest time. However, when the colonial people came to India, they came with certain lenses and they wrote a kind of a history that started fitting their objectives. They were soon followed by the Eurocentric people who wanted to know how is it that Sanskrit, Latin, and Greek languages are related. If they're related, what is the relationship between the Indian people and the European people? So that narration grew into fairly Eurocentric narration talking about the homeland for these people and so on. They went hand in hand with vested interests, people like the church, the missionaries and so on. They came with their own narrators for their own purposes, and that clouded the content even more. And since 1947, the academia was usurped by socialist academia bias, who came with etic lenses from outsider lens like sociology and so on. And they came with their own kind of narratives. Today, since 1972 or so, the Marxists are controlling the narrative on India. So these five forces are inimically disposed towards Hindu history and identity. So history with ideology of these participants has led to a subversion of identity. That is where we are today. So the narratives are tightly held by these five participants. That is why we're finding it difficult to change it even today. So the best we can do is go with the evidence-based narrative and show where the historiography methods failed, what methods did they use, what data did they use, can we critique that and show where they've gone wrong, and therefore where is the evidence leading us. That is what we do in this course. So the early motivations, like I said, the colonial people, the hegemony of the Portuguese, the Dutch, the French, and the British, who had a piece of the action in India at various points. And they came hand in hand with Christian imperialism, 1500s to present. People like, I just put two names here, but there are many, many more, Robert Calvin, G.O. Pope, and many others. And they went hand in hand with the scholarly aspect of colonial studies, the Eurocentrism, linguistics, anthropological studies, and their notion of what caste is imposing the Jati Varna system, people like Herbert Risley, Max Muller, and others. So these people, hand in hand with circular arguments, came about with this Aryan invasion migration theory. And if we think that this is a thing of the past and we are now living in more enlightened times, unfortunately, that is not true. This received wisdom of linguistics is used even today, fortified by academia with ethic sociology, making use of lenses that are appropriate for the Western experience that is used and imposed in India to show all of Indian history and social dynamics as one of class conflicts. This is the Marxist, classic Marxist idea that all of history is the struggle of people, and it is their struggles, the class conflicts, that is what is all of history all about. So that is the kind of lens they come with. And today it has been fortified with archaeology in addition, and I will talk a little bit about that in the next few slides. And hand in hand with genetics, people like David Reich and others. And these circular arguments once again directly infringe on the Indian identity and the Hindu identity. We see continued circular dependencies. One might ask, why was Hindu history even distorted? Well, it turns out that the early historians, colonial historians, are motivated by a desire to control and to uphold biblical chronologies. They came in an era when they believed that the biblical God created the world in 4004 BCE, destroyed the world in 3000 BCE, and every living person on earth is a progeny of Noah and his children, and so on and so forth. So when they saw Indian history not fitting into this timeline, they wanted to, they took it on themselves to correct the so-called failures in Indian chronology, and they came with their lenses. Eurocentric analysis, like I said, to try to see where is the root for these Indo-European languages and where is the homeland for this ancestral language in Central Asia. That gave about the Aryan Invasion Theory, where Dravidians are assumed to be different people. So they said there are two language families in India, the Northern Indian, the Aryans, and the Southern Indian, the Dravidians. Now, the missionaries came and played the muddied waters over there with a desire to convert the Southern Indians. And like I said, the socialist academia privileges alien sociological lens to study Indian history. And the Marxists, they desire to subvert the Indic identity. Their belief is that change comes on the back of a revolution. In India, the old order is Hinduism. By destroying Hinduism, they believe that they can inject their noxious ideology. So that so-called utopian classless society, and so on. So we see that the hatred is real. A whole lot of people are walking chained and shackled in their minds, a mind colonized with this 200 years of this indoctrination. So much so that even leaders like Narayan Murthy and others go about and publicly saying that the reason we are not progress is because of Hinduism, the culture of the last 3,000 years or so, and the implication Hinduism must be thrown out for progress. So this is the sad aspect of where we are landed with protests all over the country, outright Hindu phobia, and these are the realities of our existence today. So to give you an example of how linguistics was used, once William Jones saw the commonality of Latin, Sanskrit, and Greek, they went about trying to say what might have been this Proto-Indo-European ancestral language. There is no archaeological record of such a language or people. There is no epigraphy or records or any such thing. However, it was reconstructed. As an example for the wheel, we have seen this very familiar bullock cart and wheel in Indian villages. It is also there in Harappa. You see the same thing and some toys and so on. So if we take a look in various languages, Old Sanskrit, Latin, Greek, Hittite, Tocharian, the words for this technology, the wheel is chakra, rotum in Latin, kuklos, and so on. Yoke is yoga or lugam, and name or hub is nabya, umbilicus, axle is aksa or axis. So the proposed reconstruction is there was an ancestral language. Whenever you see a star in the word, it means a reconstructed word. I don't even know how to pronounce this. Maybe it is Kweklo or something to that effect. And this morphed into the Proto-Indo-Iranian word, again reconstructed, called Kekro, from which is derived the modern word, Sanskrit, chakra. So the irony of this kind of a reconstruction is Sanskrit provided the data for the reconstruction of this so-called ancestral language, PIE. Then once they used the assumption that PIE is reconstructed from Sanskrit, they turned around, made that a fact. The fact became that the PIE language is a fact. And from that, the migrations happened, and Sanskrit is a derivative of that. This is one of the worst kind of sciences anybody could do, where you take your assumptions and convert them into facts. So anyway, that has been fortified today into two modern narratives with archaeology in addition. And the thought leaders are Maria Gimbutas and Colin Renfro. Maria Gimbutas came about saying that from Central Asia, this language, this expansion happened in three ways: 4000 BC to 1500 BC, the domestication of the horse and so on. And Anatolian hypothesis, Colin Renfro, said once agriculture was invented in Anatolia, Turkey, then the expansion of that throughout the world, that led to a spread of agriculture as well as language, 6500 BCE. Most people today talk about Kurgan because it seems they claim that aligns with the genetics evidence too. And this hypothesis, the Kurgan or step hypothesis, says that 3500 BC, between Caspian Sea and Black Sea, people called Yamnaya culture who lived over here. And by 2500 BC, they've domesticated the horse, the chariot, and iron, and swords, and whatnot, and they spread to the east and west, becoming Cordedware people, east, the Andronovo people. At the same time, you see in Sumeria, there was civilization, Egypt, there was civilization, India, all kinds of activities going on, civilization, China, there was civilization. So this is only the story of the so-called Indo-European people per the linguistics plus archaeology model. By 1500 BCE, this model says they are specialized into Hittites, Babylonians, Mycenaeans, and so on. And this Bactria Margiana archaeological complex entered Sindh into India. By 500 BC, they spread all over the Ganga plain, becoming the Aryans. And you see the appearance of Dravidians in the record over here. So this is the model which they have. So the Aryan Invasion Theory says bands of male warriors, Central Asia invaded India 1500 BCE, replaced the existing civilization, and brought an entirely new Vedic religion, the Sanskrit and Vedic ecosystem. And today we see that the discourse has become very, very vitiated. And there's a lot of assertions and counter assertions and people who are literally talking past each other. So we see there are two main research groups. One is the out of India theory, where people are saying a lot of evidence is supporting the out of India, and the Aryan invasion theory, which is the academia, media, and others who are saying it is into India. So the kind of assertions, the out of India says Harappa archaeology does not show any sign of invasion, destruction, burning of the cities, and all those kind of things. This side they say perhaps it was a migration, it is not an invasion. So the story of invasion became one of migration. On this side, they say Harappa trade material has been found in Mesopotamia, Central Asia, Dilmun, in Bahrain, other places. This implies that trade spread languages. It's not an invasion kind of thing. It's trade that spread languages. On this side, they say, no, it is migration. It's the horse, chariot. These are the ones that spread Indo-European language. On this side is a Rig Veda horse has got 34 ribs, whereas a Central Asian horse has got 36 ribs. On this side, they say Rig Vedic people did not know how to count. They mistook 34 for 36. On this side, they say, wait a minute, Saraswati River is there in many, many mandalas, and that event became dry before the so-called Aryan invasion theory. How can they be talking about a powerful Saraswati River and so on? On this side, they say, no, Saraswati River is mythical. It is not even a real river. So this is the kind of discourse that we have. And I encounter this on almost a daily basis. For example, people who come and say, the Slavic people, the Celts had Vedic deities. How is that possible? This proves Sanskrit came to India from Central Asia. Greek stories are similar to Hindu stories. How? That proves Sanskrit came to India from Central Asia. Rig Veda has got a verse where Griffith translation says, the Indra had yellow beard. How? That proves Sanskrit came to India from Central Asia. They say the Mitannis and the Hittites and Turkey, Syria, Iraq had Sanskrit. How is that possible? It proves Sanskrit came to India from Central Asia. So these kind of jerk-knee reactions that try to make these assertions. Even more assertions from Southern Indians especially. No Shrauta practices in the South till late 300 BC proves Aryan invasion, Dravidian oppression, and so on. Brahmin migration to South, copper plates, records, Pallava, Chola period, or the proof of caste practice, lower caste could not enter temple, or Indus Valley civilization and Kiradi had the same script. Kiradi excavation yielded Brahmi and Indus scripts, whereas the Aryans didn't have a script. Therefore, it proves Aryan invasion, Dravidian oppression, Sanskrit, and these kind of things. Continuing on, people who say Sanskrit came with Aryans, Indus Valley people spoke Proto-Dravidian. Note how there's a new language, Proto-Dravidian here. Aryans mixed with Dravidians. That's why we have different language families in India. IVC and Kiradi were urban civilizations, whereas the Vedic civilization was rural, pastoral. That's why we prove AIT, Dravidian oppression, and so on. And David Reich has got this ancestral North Indian and ancestral South Indian models that proves the genetics of Indians. Again, the script issue, or even the dead. IVC and Kiradi buried the dead. Aryans cremated the dead. So these are the kind of narrations that have come to us today. And like I said, how do we evaluate these claims? What do we use to see how we can sort out the fiction from the fact and have a narrative over here? So there are lots of claims on deep history of India. I showed 5 agencies and I question how to analyze these claims. And I'm saying we need to deconstruct the claims. the data used, the models used, who proposed that, when, how, with what data, models, and methods, examine the evidence from different areas, and then we'll be in a position to propose evidence-based narrative. So I'll quickly talk about antiquity of Indian knowledge-based civilization. I have two talks out there where I've summarized a lot of these ideas. But in terms of archaeology and paleontology, we see great antiquity of human presence in India, artifacts from 1 million years ago, which are Homo erectus, if you will, those samples. Narmada Man and Athiram they show evidence from 350,000 years ago, what appeared to be closer to the modern human rather than Homo erectus. So there appear to be those kind of samples. 40,000 years ago, we have got cave art tools from all over India. A recent paper by Professor Ramaswamy shows ports and settlements in Pumpuhar going back 15,000 to 18,000 years ago, a staggeringly ancient period of time. 10,000 years ago, Edakal, Birana, we got artifacts. 8,000 years ago, underwater artifacts in Dwaraka. And what I call recent in this context, from 5,000 years ago to present at Harappa, Saraswati, Ganga plains, the Janapada period, the Kiradi, Arikameda, Pattanam, and many other places. So we got a continuity of human presence in India for the longest time, and we got artifacts that do not show any disruption in continuity and so on. So it is not periodization. There seems to be clear continuity. So we'll talk about archaeology in the course. Another major area that we'll talk about in the course is examining the Indian astronomical model and concepts of astronomy and what the artifacts in Indian texts are talking about. For example, we will learn that there's something called a nakshatra model of Indian astronomy, which is mentioned in Atharva Veda as well as Taittiriya Samhita. These are ancient texts, and based on the dates over there, we can propose some dates over here. There's an ancient Indian book called Vedanga Jyotisha, and this can be dated to 1400 BCE based on again, the artifacts contained therein. Yajnavalkya's Shatapatha Brahmana, that has got an observation of the Kritika Nakshatra on the east side, never sourced in the east. This can be dated to 2982 BCE. Then there's a calendar system reference, planets clustered in the Revati Nakshatra, which can be dated to 3102 BCE. Then we have got Rigvedic the context of Aditi, Aditi, the mother of gods, literally, that refers to vernal equinox at Punarvashu at 6000 BCE. Another famous story of Ashwini, Surya, Sanjana, Chaya, that story refers to the heliacal rising of Ashwini in 7200 BCE. Then in Surya Siddhanta, we have got the nakshatra called Swati or the star called Arcturus that has got a proper motion. Proper motion is our observed movement of the star's position in the sky. Based on the proper motion, we can date Surya Siddhanta's measurement of Swati to 8000 BCE. We have got a couple of other phenomena, Rohini Shakatabeda, as well as Agastya story, that are even more ancient. Now, how do we know all of these things? In this course, I'll introduce not only understanding of Indian astronomy, I'll also bring in the understanding of planetarium software, modern software like Stellarium. Stellarium is a free software. We will learn how to use that. I'll have tutorials where even you would be able to go and simulate the conditions described in the text and see what dates are coming out of the Stellarium software. Through that, we will conclude several of these things. The question to ask at the end of the course over here is, how can Vedic concepts be embedded in astronomical observations before the so-called Aryan Invasion Theory? So clearly, we have red flags going up in the linguistic model that has ignored all of these internal evidence. For example, we can use the astronomy argument to rebut the Aryan Invasion Theory model, and there are many rebuttals. This is just one such rebuttal. Max Muller proposed a relative chronology of linguistics where per the Aryan invasion theory of 1500 BCE, he said after they landed up in India, these pastoral primitive people, they composed the earliest books of Rig Veda in the so-called Chandas period, 1200 to 1000 BCE. The remaining books in the Mantra period, then the Saman, Yajurveda, Samhita, Aranyakas, Upanishads, and the Brahmana period, 800 to 600 BC, and all the Vedangas, whether it's Jyotisha Vedanga, Vedanga Jyotisha, Vyakarna, Nirutta, and other such things, all the Sutra period, 600 to 200 BCE. Well, by examining the astronomy, Even the Colebrook, who's a Western scholar who lived in the colonial period, he said Vedanga Jyotisha should be dated to 1400 BCE. If Jyotisha is 1400 BC, what does that say about Max Muller's putting the Vedanga Jyotisha to the Sutra period, 600 to 200 BC? Clearly, we have a problem over here. Then he put the Brahmana period 800 to 600 BC, but we are seeing Shatapatha Brahmana, Kritika Nakshatra 2982 BC. Clearly, there's a discordance over here. Similarly, the Rig Vedic stories of Aditi, Ashwini is going back to ancient periods of time, whereas Max Muller thinks that thought rather that Chandas and Mantra period is where it should be put to. So clearly, we can refute much of the linguistic model analysis by taking the astronomy evidence. There's just one such refutation. This is not the only refutation. When Max Muller was confronted with this kind of evidence, he was very irate when somebody asked him, should all of Indian chronology be held hostage to the biblical chronology? In response, he wrote this book on ancient Hindu astronomy and chronology, where he completely derided all of Indian astronomy, all of the texts. He said that he's not going to accept the credibility of any text. He said that none of those texts can be believed and so on. So he only accepted his fellow European Colebrook's date for Vedanga Jyotisha because that is after Aryan Invasion Theory, 1400 BC. But the rest of it, he completely discarded, saying he's not going to accept it. There was one more person called John Bentley who alleged that all of the chronology was fabricated. He proposed outrageous theories that are even rejected by his own countrymen. And unfortunately, these views are used even till the present times by Indian scholars who are well disposed towards the out of India model. In addition, they also flaunt these kind of theories that have their roots in Eurocentrism, biblical chronology, and so on. One will have to evaluate even astronomical data, models, methods with the same critical eye that we are applying on the other fields also. And by doing that, we can uphold much of these rather than rejecting it in this manner. So the other major area we will examine is archaeogenetics. This is a new frontier to the past. Today, people are asking, can we determine ancestral migrations using ancestral DNA? So they make use of something called maternal mitochondrial DNA research, or using the gender chromosome, the Y chromosome, the male, using that, or also using the 22 autosomes, via genome-wide research. So you got all three ways of looking at genetics. Today, it's a highly specialized multidisciplinary field. You got a field worker, lab specialist, bioinformatician, programmer, applied mathematician, and somebody interprets the results. It is not something that is easy for one person to span through because the expertise demanded is different in each of these. It's a very difficult field, in other words. But we will simplify this sufficiently so we understand the methods and what is being proposed, and we'll be in a position to critique some of these things. So we will learn, for example, that if we look at the ancestral migration as per the empty DNA records of various peoples all over the world, we will find that the earliest empty DNA for modern humans goes to Africa, the so-called L0 mutation or lineage. So from L0 to L6, all these lineages were in Africa. Out of Africa is M and N. M and N are in India. It is from India that the rest of the lineages in the world were populated as far as empty DNA is concerned. So looking at this map, we see L0 to L6 is in India. Out of India, the migrations come, out of Africa, the migrations come to India, M, N, and R. And it is from here that the rest of the world, including North, South America, Australia, and other places were populated. And the age of these migrations, the black line is 90 to 55,000 years ago, orange line 55 to 30,000 years ago. This is our understanding of modern human migrations using the empty DNA records. If you look at the Y chromosome, not just the maternal mitochondrial, if you look at the Y chromosomes, that too tells a similar story. Lineages A0 to C are all in Africa. Out of Africa, the first male lineage we see is F, which is in India. Then you see G, H, I, J, K, and all of these, once again, up to L are in India and is an out of India migration. And looking at this map, we see once again in Africa, Out of Africa, we see the F, Hijkl in India. It is from here you see these ancient migrations going outside. And once again, this black is around 100,000 years ago. And this blue that you see is 50 to 25,000 years ago. So these are the kind of analysis that historians did, genetics people did early on using mtDNA and the Y chromosomal DNA records. Pretty soon, the narrative became one of trying to say, is there an Aryan gene? The so-called Aryan gene would have been linked to the linguistic migration from Central Asia into India in 1500 BCE. People homed into something called R1A, which is a Y chromosomal indicator, and they tried to say this is the one that talks of migration. We will learn that many researchers, Bashu in 2003, Kevisil, Cordiu, Sengupta, Tansim, others up to Tangaraj in 2010, they each had opinions on where R1A originated in different research studies. Some people said Central Asia, Southern Asia, North India, Southern Asia, South Asia, Northwestern India, South Asia, South Asia. So you see several researchers say it is in India. Some researchers say it is in Central Asia. So it opens a question. There is no consensus as such over here, though more of the researchers seem to be saying R1A originated in India. It is not a Central Asian one. It fails to validate the linguistic model. We have several issues in genetics, and we learn about this in models, data, sampling, and so on. If we take David Reich, who's from Harvard Medical School, he proposes that in the high resolution data R1A Z93, he says Central Asians and Northern Indians have a most recent common ancestor going back 4,000 years. Whereas in another study, Lucot, a French professor, he says the same R1A Z93 using his data, Central Asians and Indians have got a common ancestor 15,000 years ago. Where is 15,000 years and where is 4,000 years? So we see huge differences, and I'm calling this out because of models, the kind of sampling they do, and the data that does not inspire confidence in the methods of genetics. That is the unfortunate reality. And I've put over here my confidence level of the genetics methodology, concerns with methodology, because of which results cannot be globalized. You can only make narrow claims. For example, if somebody says, in this room over here with 50 people or so, this person has got a genetic marker, that person does not have this genetic marker. That is a fact because we can actually measure, do some biological sampling, and we can figure out, yes, he's got this marker, he doesn't have that marker. No problem about that. However, the next level of studies is you say that this population has got X% of R1A or this marker. In addition, they talk about direction of genetic flow, that it came from that side to this side. I have got some problems with this because the data does not lend to such a conclusion. Unfortunately, it is by using circular arguments from history and other areas that there's an Aryan Invasion Theory linguistic model. By using those kind of constraints, only then can they make these kind of claims. Finally, they say percentage of inheritance from an ancient sample. For example, there is so much a percentage of R1A from Central Asia, so much of percentage from some other place. That is utterly bogus, including the direction of genetic flow. There are several problems with the models, methodology, data, samples, and claims. Results can only be narrow, very, very narrow. One can say in the context of the 5,500 samples that I took and these population sizes and these population types, one can say, this is my narrow conclusion. You cannot say, I've conflated this result to addressing the issue of Aryan invasion into India, the origin of Sanskrit, the origin of caste system. That is utter bogus and rubbish. Anybody who claims that should be subjected to scrutiny, and one has got to see the confidence level. So our conclusions from these things would be exactly what I said. The results cannot be globalized. One can only make narrow claims. One cannot conclude genetic influence in India following a postulated Indo-European language expansion. So those will be the first part of the course that I'll be dealing with. In the second part, I'll be talking about this untenable narrative that was on knowledge systems, on where did the knowledge systems of India come from? Did we owe it to the Greeks, Babylonians, and the Chinese, and who else, and so on. So we discuss very quickly, I'll give you, and we'll conclude the talk after that, knowledge systems and outflow from India. We see that in India, we've had the Shruti and the Smriti. Shruti, the Vedas, Upanishads, Aranyakas, Brahmanas, Samhitas, we know this. And Smriti is a matrix and a bedrock of Indian knowledge systems, the darshanas, the Vedangas, grammar, meter, astronomy, rituals, itihasas, shastras on dharma, artha, kama, moksha, puranas, kavyas, and nibandhas, politics, medicine, culture, arts. What we see is in ancient India, if a person wanted intellectual fulfillment in any of these areas, he could easily learn these methods and fit into the framework of learning in India. Additionally, in India, the epistemology of knowledge systems, it was very, very well developed. We have had hundreds of rishis who have created thousands of works spread from very ancient times to present. And the pramana was a means to knowledge. How do you accept a certain kind of knowledge? In India, the authority for knowledge came from perception, inference, comparison, postulation, derivation circumstances, non-perception, negative proof, or Shabda Pramana. And different sampradayas only differed from what was admissible as a path of knowledge. Charvakas, only perception. Buddhists, perception and inference. For example, Vaisheshika also, perception and inference. Vashishta Advaita, Dvaita took several more. Advaita took all of these things, as we can see. So what we are observing is, in line with an ancient civilization, if India was a recent civilization, remember, the narrative says 1500 BCE, Aryans came to India. These were a pastoral, nomadic people who did not have knowledge. It would not be possible for India to acquire this deep epistemology, as well as the enormous numbers of work that we're seeing, as well as the enormous impact on the rest of the world. That is where we are going to with this kind of analysis. And we quickly see the roots of medicine are in Atharva Veda, which led to Ayurveda. We all know about Charaka, Shushruta, Samhitas, compendiums, huge compendiums, encyclopedic of Indian medical knowledge. We also will learn that the Mitannis, Hittites, Egyptians, Chinese were influenced by Indic systems. Medieval Europe depended on drugs from India. Arab medicine based on Ayurveda since Ben Qasim's invasion of Sindh. Ayurveda formed the corpus of European knowledge all through the colonial era. In fact, Ayurveda was taught in British medical schools till 1880 and formed the core pharmaceutical methods. If you go to mathematics, we see the origin in Vedas, number systems, large number, operations, Sulba Sutras of Baudhayana showing greatly refined geometry, square roots, and other algebraic methods. Aryabhata's time, we see trigonometry, spherical geometry, algebra, Surya Siddhanta, enormous works over here. Then you go on to other mathematicians, astronomers, people like Brahmagupta, Bhaskara, 1, 2, who worked on algebra, positional math, zero, functional approximation, Kerala School of Math, which even developed calculus, all the way to Ramanujam, who was very close to our own lifetimes, who continued the tradition of Indian mathematicians with deep results in non-convergent infinite series. So amazing, divergent infinite series rather. Going on to music, we see earliest musical systems from Samaveda. We see three-tonal liturgical music gave way to five-tone music, seven swara music, the 12 semitone scales to the 22 Shruti system. Musical intervals are based on chord ratios. It's not C-H-O-R-D, but C-O-R-D, based on rope or string. Pythagoras used the same ratios, is the originator of Western music tradition, and we will learn some correspondences between Indian music and Western music through the prism of the mathematics that was prevalent in India and passed on to ancient Greece. Roots of astronomy, we see that initially astronomical knowledge was embedded in stories. We also see heliocentric model is encoded Shatapatha Brahmana, Aithriya Brahmana. It is used later on by Aristarchus. It gave way to Siddhantic astronomy, which is mathematical astronomy, and many of these works are lost. For example, Surya Siddhanta refers to about 18 Siddhantas prior to it, and many of those Siddhantas are lost. We don't have that. So we don't know what mathematical tradition existed much before Surya Siddhanta. So we see that there are math models to estimate the course of sun, moon, planets, development of trigonometry, spherical geometry. Aryabhata had models to estimate eclipse, duration of eclipse, length of shadow, curvature of earth. Brahmagupta. Bhaskara too estimated rate of precision. And Nilakanta Somayaji school of from Kerala School of Mathematics, he had a model for partial heliocentrism, which was used later on by some of the Europeans in addition. And we also learned that centers of learning were destroyed in India by Muslim invasions. Very interesting to learn that, including the roots of modern system. Today, we are using digital communications through Zoom and other such places. Digital systems are at the root of modern technological systems, and they are based on logic gates. For example, things like the NOT gate, AND gate, OR, XOR, and all of these kind of things, which are known to electrical engineers. So these are the transistors and IC chips that allow us to turn on voltage on or off, and they implement something called 0, 1 or Boolean algebra. Based upon that, we can make it to do complex programming tasks and enable all of these amazing technological things that we can do today using computers, cell phones, internet, and other such things. Now, the roots of this kind of logic is there in Nasatya Sukta and various other works like Pingala, Hemachandra, and other works. We see logic over there. Colebrook, he wrote a work on Indian logic in 1824, and this greatly influenced these two gentlemen who every electrical engineer reads about, George Boole and D. Morgan. And Mary Evers Boole, who was the wife of George Boole, she wrote a letter to Jagdish Chandra Bose in 1901, and she said Indian logic greatly influenced them. So we see the ecosystem of today's knowledge systems have got roots all the way back in Indian logical systems. That is what we're seeing here. And in line with everything that I said, we see, although this is a meme over here, it is talking about several universities that existed in India. There are several books, Radha Kumar Mukherjee and Apte as well as Sahana, who are talking about various Indian education systems, facilities that existed in India, in line with what we're seeing on the knowledge systems. When I talk about impact of knowledge systems in the rest of the world, people often ask, how did it happen? What was the route for knowledge transmission? Well, I'm identifying several routes for knowledge transmission. There is one which is Vedic records of migration to the west around 3000 BCE. We know that climate change induced migration happened in 2000 BCE, 100-year monsoon failure that led to a migration out of India into the Mitanni lands, Hittite, Elamite, Canaanite, Babylonian contacts in this time frame. There was also contact in the Mycenaean period. We talk about that also. And there are a lot of Greek travelers who came to India in addition around 500 BC, 400 BC, and so on. People like Pythagoras, Democritus, Pyrrhon, and many others who came. So we know of all these things. Second route for knowledge transfer, we know that ever since the Mauryans had pushed the Seculists and Seleucus and others out of India, the Greeks, the Seleucid Empire, that formed a conduit between India to the Mediterranean lands, and that also was a mechanism for knowledge transmission. We also know the Silk Route, an informal trade network that connected from Southeast Asia to China, India, through all of Central Asia and Mediterranean lands. This trade network also was trading with Indian knowledge, you could say. For example, the Boer manuscript. Boer manuscript is the oldest existing document on Indian medical systems. And that was found in Xinjiang province, somewhere over here. The fact that an Indian medical texts are also part of the Silk Route tells us that Indian knowledge also went on the Silk Route to various parts of the world. Then we go to the Roman era, when the Roman trade, after Greece and Rome had a battle, and finally the Romans won 145 BCE. They conquered the Greeks, and soon after there was trade between the Romans through the Indians, and this happened from ports in Greece and Italy and others. They would come to Alexandria, and there was no Suez Canal in those days, so there was a land route from there to the Red Sea. And from the ports in Red Sea, they would trade and come to India and all of these ports, and they would trade in a whole lot of things. We know about that. The evidence is from Periplus of Erythraean Sea that is talking about all of this trade happening. There's a whole lot of other evidence also that talks about this. Knowledge too was conducted from here to the Mediterranean lands, and we talk about these things in our course. Then the Muslim transmissions from ever since Bin Qasim invaded Sindh and destroyed some of the things over there. We also know that Indian scholars and texts were taken to Baghdad. People like Manka, for example, who were taken to Kanka, who were taken to Baghdad, and they were made to translate the their works, different works on medicine, mathematics, astronomy, and others. into Persian and into Arabic, and these were injected in all the Muslim lands. This is the Abbasid Caliphate, all the way from these parts through Arabia, through Egypt, to Morocco, through Algeria, all the way to southern Spain, which was under Muslim control in those days, Cordoba the capital. So all of these places benefited from the translation of Sanskrit works into Arabic and Persian and injected all the way from 700 current era to 1600 current era. Now, there were also European church travelers. We know of Marco Polo, Jordanus Catalani, and many other travelers who came 10th century to 19th centuries, directly came to India and took knowledge systems. We also know that in northern Spain, if I go back to the previous map over here, this southern Spain, in northern Spain, Toledo was a capital and a Christian monastery there. Their only job was to translate the Arabic texts into Latin because they knew that the Muslims had superior mathematics. That mathematics was learned in Indian mathematics, for example, astronomy, medicine, and others. And so they translated those Arabic texts into Latin. And those Latin works from 10th, 11th, 12th century was seeding the elite of Europe, Western Europe, on its way to the Renaissance. The Renaissance was not born in a vacuum. It was through the knowledge systems that are gained through these texts from these areas. So the translation schools, this is what happened, including in Italy, not only in Toledo. Sicily was also under the control. If I go back over here, Sicily over here, this is also under the control of the Muslims. So there's a lot of knowledge, Indian knowledge in Sicily also translated in Italy. We also know the colonialists, 16th to 20th century, who came to India directly and took knowledge, especially the Dutch, French, and the British. So all of the Indic knowledge in various periods of times impacted various people. I've shown a little graphic over here. Went to the Greeks and the Romans in very ancient periods of time. When Roman Empire adopted Constantine Christianity, 330 current era, they also destroyed the pagan knowledge. Theodosius, for example, they destroyed all the Greek libraries and temples and so on. So this knowledge was lost in that period of time. However, the knowledge lived on in Syria, in Lebanon, and places like this. It was inherited by the Arabs later on who became the Muslims. They consolidated that knowledge, also knowledge that they got destructively from India. And all of this knowledge was injected into Europe through these translation schools that I talked about. And it's come back to us today, repackaged. Knowledge went directly through travelers and colonials and also through this mechanism. It has come back to us today without citation. And we think that our ancestors had nothing to do with the knowledge systems of today, but in our course, we will learn the deep ecosystem of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, sciences, going back to Indic systems. So this is the grand conclusion that we will work towards. So we will work towards how the analysis of the claims from each of these narratives, we will strike it out as incorrect based upon our analysis of the models, data, methods that they've used. And we will understand that the evidence-based methods are the ones we can uphold, saying there's an out of India theory, Indic civilization is ancient, invasions are responsible for widespread poverty, Indic thought impacted the East and the West, Indic thought seeded the Greeks and the Babylonians, and we'll also learn that the identities are spurious and manufactured. So these are the courses. This is a two-term course, everything that I talked to you about. The first term is called Reconstructing Hindu History. The commissions, that'll be all of the historiography and the methods and other such things. We'll analyze genetics, astronomy, archaeology, all of these things. In the second part, the omissions, that is where we'll investigate the narratives on the knowledge systems and the transmission of knowledge systems. What is that knowledge? Who are the actors who transmitted it? Where is the evidence for that? We will learn all of these things. So in the course of 2 terms, we will cover all of the content I have shown you in this little time. So with that, I've come to the end of my talk. So we can take questions if Ankurji can coordinate it.
Wow, my mind is blown. That was amazing. I'm a little angry that I didn't know about all this stuff and inspired and amazed that you packaged it in 1 hour. You went through all of this. My father actually took the course with you, and he said every time there's so much stuff that just goes over his head. There's so much information. I'm sure people have actually mentioned that, you know, it's so many technical terms, so many details. Maybe you could just elaborate on your journey and how, you know, you came through this and packaged this. But before you do that, I've dropped the link to the course in the chat, some details of the time and the date. And I'd also like to announce, a lot of people are inspired by you. There's no doubt. And we have a very generous gift from Nainan and Devyani Desai, and also from Ramesh Ponapali, who are giving scholarships. They're going to offer them in a first come, first served basis. They're offering $100 scholarships for this particular course because they think your work is so important. And as I think a lot of us do, that they're offering the scholarship and gift to HUA in this form to increase enrollment, to help share, repackage this knowledge the other way, right, from ourselves forward. So we're thankful for their support, Nainan and Devyani Desai and Ramesh Ponapali, for the gifts. And again, this is a first come, first serve $100 scholarship for this course this quarter. So please click register now. We're going to get into questions. Put your questions in the Q&A box, please, not in the chat. It kind of scrolls. It gets difficult to follow. So again, thank you for that $100 scholarship. For the first to register, please take advantage of this, because I mean, one webinar, and I'm sure a lot of people are impressed. There's so much information. It's amazing. And the way that you lay it out, issue by issue, model by model, and then deconstruct the mainstream narrative in such an amazing way. Starting off with Jay Bansalji, he says, Dr. Vedam, there are a number of scholars working on the project of setting the Indian history right. Is there any effort being made to form a formal or informal collaboration among these scholars to maximize productivity?
So thank you for the question, Jai Bansalji. I am aware there are several groups who are trying to do various things. I myself have been contacted by a couple of groups, and I'm trying to work with them. The biggest problem that we have is we don't have a central authority, neither do we have institutional support or governmental support to do this. So we are fragmented voices. We are fragmented scholars sitting in our little rooms over here and doing what we do. So there is no coordination, or there is no ways to get scholars together and work towards a common goal. I'd love to see that evolve, but so far, nothing like that has happened. There are small groups of people in various places working to develop textbook content to align with NEP 2020 and so on. There is no guarantee these textbooks will be adopted, because these textbooks, adoption is left to the state governments. They may or they may not take it. Nevertheless, the content is being prepared. Again, it's not as deep as this, because I myself had no input into many of these groups that have been working on this. So I'm working with one group right now in Bangalore. Hopefully can influence some of the things that they're doing.
And of course, Dr. Vedam, you're working with Hindu University of America to make this accessible to everyone who wants to participate here. Hindu University of America is a Hindu platform. We welcome, we're inclusive. We want people to be a part of this. This is a free webinar we're offering. So Jay Bansalji and I are working on a couple other projects, and we're glad to have you. But I think we're at this just base, right? We're at the beginning of unleashing and coordinating. And again, thank you to the over 100 people who've stayed for this. You can be a part of this. Join us on this journey. Take this course. I don't think you're going to be disappointed. Next, we have Jay Iyer, who is asking, or says, wow, yeah, there are a lot of technical terms. Will the course allow time for explaining them and their appropriateness for understanding Hindu history? And maybe just broadly, talk about the course, the requirement, the hours. We have a learning management system, so you get your @hua.edu email address, and then week by week, Dr. Vedam lays out some information for you to read if you want to just elaborate on that and how that has been, because you've completed the 2-course sequence one time now, right? You offered each course once, and now this is the first time you're offering the course again, the second time you're offering this course overall.
So the second iteration, like Ankurji just said, the second iteration. So we learned the few places where we can make things a little better and so on. That's been offered in the second. So there is a well laid out plan at HUA, like Ankurji was saying, which you will plug into. So it is very systematic. If the class content to be announced week by week, there'll be reading material in each week. There'll be encouragement to write a final paper towards the end of the term, and that'll be evaluated for your grade and so on. So every class my classes tend to run to about 2 hours or so. And we have about 1.5 hours of content and at least half an hour of discussion. Sometimes the discussion goes even into 1 hour and so on. So I stay till the last question is answered. And the questions are great. The discussions are a great place where you can see other people's doubts also and do that. Background. You really don't need any background because I make an effort to go to the basics. Although I work in different areas in these sciences, I go to the very basics and make sure that it is the pedagogy is such that you will understand what it is. It is not necessary to be a PhD in biochemistry or genetics to understand the genetics argument. We will learn at a very simple level what is this. So I don't think one would need more than high school or college level understanding of sciences, math, or any such thing.
Beautiful, beautiful. Arvinji kind of asks two-part question: what efforts are being made to rewrite the correct history? I mean, we talked about that already, but also they're asking specifically to young kids. So that's one thing. And I'd also like to say we have a parallel faculty, Dr. DK Hemahuri and Dr. DK Hurry, who are focused on making this more accessible for youth, because obviously you heard Dr. Vedam give this high level conversation and detail and presentation. We have Exploring Hinduism for Teens and Parents, targeted at young people, not at this level, but in a more, manageable way for younger folks. But Dr. Vedam, if you want to answer that more broadly,
Yeah,
or
yeah, so many people have asked me to get this content for children. I've expressed my inability because the content that I'm developing over here, like I said, will require a high school graduation or a college level understanding. I would love to have some other people walk with me in the journey and try to translate this content who understand the child's mind, whether the middle school child or the elementary school child or the high school kid. If one understands how to translate this content that is important to them, why should the child know what haplogroups, for God's sake? So you might want to say that is not relevant for the child. This is important. And so take that and translate that. That translation needs to be done by an expert in writing content for children. I'd love to have some people like that working with some of the research that I'm doing. I myself am unable to do that, unfortunately.
yeah, no, I totally understand. And maybe somebody who's interested in that can take advantage of one of those scholarships, register early, get into the course, and let's build this out together. I'm dropping it in the chat again, the registration link, the time and the dates, as the NSG is asking in the Q&A box. I'm just gonna leave that there. Next, what kind of background is needed as a prerequisite? You already answered that. Sorry, let me maybe a specific question on the Indus Valley civilization, cremation, burials, and you share with us some deeper knowledge on the Indus Valley civilization that you think we might be interested in.
So, so yes, these are some of the battlegrounds over here. So we know that at Harappa, we are seeing, for example, a cemetery age. The cemetery age culture shows both burial as well as cremation. Cremation also appears to be there. Well, it is not only the archaeological record that shows both burial as well as cremation. For example, even southern India, go to Adi Chanalur and places like that, you find urn burials. You go to Sanoli, where they found the chariots, they have found burials over there also. So in India, including the Rig Veda makes a reference to ancestors who were cremated and not cremated. It is making a reference to both, showing that even the Rig Veda is familiar that there were two practices in India, some of cremation and some of this. So if somebody comes and says, the fact that I'm seeing cremation, I'm seeing burial, therefore there's evidence of a different culture coming in, such a claim has got to be evaluated. And that is what we'll do in this course. Is that evidence? You see, if I have two dots, I can draw a straight line, I can draw a curve, I can draw another curve, I can draw different curves that go through the same two data points. They're all valid because they both meet the two data points. They're all equal curves. But why should I privilege one curve over the other? That is the analytical aspect of what we're doing. We're trying to say, what is your assumption? What is your claim? What is your methodology? And then we try to say, all right, is your claim tenable? Is it tenable what you're saying? So many of these claims start with Aryan Invasion Theory. They brought in cremation. Earlier to that, there was burial. So we will examine those. Yes, that is a data point that seems to be fitting what you're observing over here. But let's go a little beyond that and see, can we understand that better? So those are the kind of things that we'll do in this course.
Thank you for that. Indrani ji is asking, Indrani Ramprasad, another friend of HUA, active in a lot of ways with the diaspora in the Caribbean. Indrani is asking about connecting DNA of the peoples of India, right? Descendants, ancestors. You got into it, and it was really interesting to see how you just have questions on the entire methodology, right? You don't know if the genetics is going one way or the other way, and then the time frame, seeing a 15,000 year versus a 4,000, 4 times difference. How reliable is it? What is that? So what is the state of that overall for us?
So, in terms of human ingenuity, it's amazing what we can do with genetics. It's amazing that we can go there, take a saliva swab or a blood sample, and we can examine going into the cells and going into the nucleus and taking the DNA out of that and trying to unstrand all of these nucleotides and the chromosomes. Amazing, mind-blowing, all the things that we can do. So naturally, there's been an attempt also to apply mathematics to this. The question is, can we take a look at these chromosomes and can we see the mutations? Now, mutations are inherited from parent to child and so on. Remember, you got two sets of parent, right? Mother's side, father's side. So some mutations are inherited along a certain lineage. So do the differences in genome tell a story of migrations? That is the premise that was brought about by Luca Cavalli Sforza. He's a professor in around 1980, 1990. He wrote a book on this, and that laid the foundation for all the genetic studies that we're seeing. What is that? Differences in the genome tell the story of why are we different from that group of people and this group of people. There is a story waiting to be told over there. Now, it is instructive to also remember that we have something called a billion or so, something called SNPs. It's a technical term we learn about these things. So the bottom line is we are 99% similar. All people of the world are 99.6 or 99.7% similar. All the differences that we are seeing, differences in terms of height, weight, color, skin colors, hair color, eye color, all these kind of things come from the 0.2 or 0.3%, which means in 0.2 or 0.3% differences is what we are using to make these huge claims about migrations and these things. I'm just putting that into perspective. We are mostly similar. If we were not similar, then one of us will be a chimpanzee, other one will be a human, and so on. So we are mostly similar, and the differences are very, very tiny. So mathematics is used to amplify these differences and try to have algorithms that do several things. The several things are, how am I related? Today, I meaning present day Indians, how are they related to Harappa sample? Somebody might say, I got a Harappa skeleton going back 4,000 years. How are the present day Indians related to the Harappa sample? That's a valid question. It's called admixture. Somebody else might say, I've got a broad swath of DNA in India from Andhra Pradesh to Karnataka to the Tamil Nadu to Uttar Pradesh and so on. And I want to find out all the mutations present in there, and can I tell a story? There are clusters over here. From these clusters, can I tell a story? So there are several different kind of analysis people are proposing in mathematics, and it intimidates most people. And I'm sure several people listening to this are also intimidated, but there's no reason to be, because we'll cut through all that and we'll just go to the philosophy of that. What is the philosophy of what they're doing, and does it bear out? I have worked for more than 30 years in this kind of mathematics, and I know the number of assumptions that are necessary to make algorithms converge. Just because an algorithm converges does not confer a certificate of correctness. I said a lot over there. If you, for example, sitting in your city, let's assume that you're in San Francisco and somebody's sitting in maybe in some hotel somewhere, and they want to go to the SFO airport. So they go to Google Map and say, how do I go from here to the airport? And Google Maps says, you can go by that road. 101 is crowded. Go by this road. Go by that road. There's a toll on this road, and so on. So 5, 6 roads are linking you over there. And which are you going to privilege? Perhaps you don't want to take a scenic drive, so you'll take a 2-hour route rather than the 45-minute route. You might do that. Why should that necessarily be more correct than some other route? This is the issue. So just because you selected one does not make it any more correct than the other routes that exist also. So this is the story in mathematics too. We have multiple answers. We have got multiple possibilities. Why are you privileging one over the other? That privileging has come because you've taken circular arguments. That is the kind of thing that we learn in this course.
Beautiful. The whole circular arguments that they use to it's amazing, and I appreciate you breaking it down. Chandraji asks, are academic universities and historians accepting these facts? You kind of mentioned it's a battle and they're still putting it forward,
Right.
but are are they accepting facts? Is that like, are we at that level?
So here is the issue. So there are few people who are talking about some of these things. Some of the stalwarts who have been working on this are people like Dr. Subhash Kar, people like David Frawley, and several other stalwarts, Rajiv Malhotra, and others have worked in bits and pieces here and there. And the coherent, huge picture, putting everything together, still needs to be done. They've done excellent work, in-depth analysis in one area, another area, and so on. And the approach that we'll follow in this course is not depth first. We are going breadth first. We are doing the breadth wise, looking at this wide area and taking a broad based view of the field. And this broad based view allows us to see these connections that is not possible if you only go in depth in one area. So that is what we're doing. So these texts have to be written. So we're still waiting for the graduates from this course to come write the blogs on these things, popularize these ideas, and take the discourse to mainstream. So that still is waiting to be done.
Rupalji's question is exactly that. Thank you for the presentation. But what is the future plan for those who complete these classes? Exactly what you said, right? In other words, how can we use this knowledge in a structured way? And it's not just this one course, as Dr. Vedam elaborated, but it's what Hindu University of America is trying to do, build this ecosystem that does support all of these different courses, ideas,
Right,
uh,
right.
bringing our knowledge to modern contemporary times in a useful way for society and for us as students and learners and individuals who are participating.
Right. And if I may add to the Ankurji, the biggest battle today that we see, whether you are in media, social media, elsewhere, you're seeing there's a battle on the Hindu identity. If you're a Hindu and you're upset about this positioning of you as a retrogressive, as a fascist, as a violent person, as anachronistic, and these kind of things, you know the truth is not there from your own lived life, the life of your ancestors, your parents. You know that is not true in the communities you lived in. You know that's completely untrue. So a course like this empowers you. It empowers you to understand where are these narratives coming from. So if somebody were to levy these kind of baseless ideas, you can go and challenge them. You can challenge them and say, no, that is not where the facts are. You're speaking like an illiterate, ignorant person who's mind colonized by these frameworks. 5 frameworks have shackled your mind, and you're just mindlessly regurgitating some of those things. You can go empowered and you can say, this is my identity, this is who I am. And my ancestors were these knowledge seekers. They're the ones who produce this enormous knowledge systems. And this is who we are as a people. You can boldly and be empowered to do that. Pass on this knowledge to your children so that their identity in America or elsewhere will be strong, rather than making them pliable to anybody who wants to impose their agenda or identities on them. So that's what this course will help you, and many other courses at HUA.
Thank you for that. And remember, we're offering a first come, first serve scholarship for this course in particular. So make sure you register. Please put your questions in the Q&A box. We have 22 open questions. I see people putting them in the chat also. It's just harder to keep track of. Dr. Trivedi asks kind of 2 questions. What is the time commitment? I know you said each course is each session is basically 2 hours, but reading and other time commitment. And then Dr. Trivedi also asks, what's the dialogue like between yourself or our side and academia that follows AMT and or
Okay, I
AMI?
don't. Okay, so
Or
so
AMI.
so so in terms of time commitment, there'll be 10 meetings, 10 weeks. We meet on Sundays. 10 meetings for the first term, 10 meetings for the second term. Totally 20 meetings. Each meeting will be about 2 hours each. So it's a 40-hour duration that we learn all of these things. And the rest is light reading material. Reading material is not very heavy. I give a mix of reading content that can be done easily, like a blog article or a magazine article. And for the people who really want to go in depth, I also give research papers. So every class will have one research paper and one magazine level reading article and something in between also. So it's up to you what you want to read. You can store these papers to read later on when you have the time and bandwidth to ramp up on some of these things. So I didn't get the second part of the question, but I hope that addresses the first part.
Yeah, no, that's really, and I didn't even know that in terms of having the different levels of reading, the magazine, the peer-reviewed probably article, and then something in between. And it's all in our learning management system. It's easily accessible, and we try to make it easy for you to do what you can, learn what you want, and participate where you can. The second half was just, is there dialogue? And I think Dr. Trivedi wrote AMT, I think probably
Aryan Invasion Theory.
AIM,
Yeah.
or yeah, go ahead. If what's the conversation like with academia on that?
So there is strange situation. Academia does not engage any of the out of India scholars. If they engage them, it is to tarnish them, tarnish their reputation, call them Hindutva, Nazis, and this kind of ideology, paint them into a corner, paint them as retrogressive, and these kind of things. So the engagement has never been positive. Even in the few scholars who have engaged, people like Professor Witzel and others who have engaged, the narratives always one of speaking down to these people and trying to, well, if you say all is fair in research, well and good, he'll take the claims and say this is where the claims are wrong. And the out of India people will come and say, no, this is where Professor Witzel totally got it wrong. He is conflating something utterly inappropriate for this context, and so on. So there's a lot of literature out there when it comes to Aryan invasion theory. Some of the modern people who are talking about, like I said, is Professor Witzel, also Dr. Conrad Elst, who agreed to come to this talk. I don't know if he's in the audience. So, and several other people who are engaging scholars and discussing some of these issues. So other than him, there are not many people who are engaging. It has been my experience that when I organize teacher training workshops and we invite the clearly left-aligned scholars and academicians to come, they refuse to come. They always cite that they have some other engagement, they don't want to come. So it has been my experience. I cannot have engagements with NCRT, the people who matter over here, and others, because they don't even want to talk to you. You don't exist. Your methods don't exist, or it is irrelevant. They will not give you the importance of time of the day.
Well, we love giving you the importance of time of day, and if they are up for a little conversation in a public forum, I'd be happy to facilitate and set that up. It's out there, and we're not afraid of the facts and the history, and we want to get into these details. So that's really interesting to hear. Maybe some conversation. Do we want to keep on going with Aryan? There's a lot of questions on this. The Sanskrit word Aryan, Arya. And actually, there's another. Pravinji asked a different, also maybe linguistic question in terms of the origin of the different languages in the north and the south of India and how that is explained.
Yeah, so this is a common trope that is used in India. There are two language families. This came about when somebody called Ellis White. Ellis White was a Britisher who had lived in Chennai as well as in Andhra Pradesh. So he wrote the foreword to his protege. His protege was somebody called Alan Campbell. So Campbell wrote a book on Telugu grammar. So he wrote a foreword to that. In that foreword, he used the help of a Sanskrit professor in identifying from Panini's word list about 100 or so words. He said this is the etymology of the word, and he tried to show that there's a difference in northern India and southern India, and he proposed there are two language families. And so that is where the idea of Dravidianism came. Till then, the idea was all of Indian languages are one big language family derived from Sanskrit. After Ellis White and Campbell, the notion was there are two language families, and one is Aryan, other one is a Dravidian. However, today there is again a trend to see India as a sprackbund. A sprackbund means a linguistic area. A linguistic area is where several languages are existing for quite some time. If you remove the constraint of Aryan invasion theory, if you take that constraint and throw it away, suddenly your mind is now unshackled. You're able to investigate other theories also. You're not constrained by the theory. When you do that, then you see genetics is telling me that ancient Indians have been here for such a long period of time. Internal mixing in the country, we have some idea from the genetics results. So we know that there was a divergence eventually in India for the longest time. Can we say that all languages only came in the last 4,000 years? I don't think so. There was some language that was used 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, 30,000 years ago. And in fact, we know there is a gene called FOXP2, FOXP2, that is responsible for speech. That FOXP2 is the one that has given humans the ability to speak, and chimpanzees can't speak because they don't have that. And this evolution must have happened about 200,000 years ago. So we know that for the longest time, people either grunted to each other to communicate, or some kind of language evolved. In India, given that modern humans have been living as per the empty DNA and Y chromosome, at least for 90,000 years to 70,000 years. How did they communicate? So there must have been some language. So there's some proto language that we cannot have any hope today of recovering. So the best that we can plausibly say is, with the data that we have, we can work backwards to convergent points that are showing two language families. But no studies have been done to see all the languages in India working with what we call phylogenetic models, something called Bayesian statistics or mathematics, working with these kind of algorithms, working backwards to find convergent points. Nobody has done the study. They've done the study in terms of southern languages and Aryan, of course, we know Aryan invasion and the PIE model. So people who have worked on southern languages are proposing that all the southern languages have got an ancestral language called Proto-Dravidian that existed in around 2200 BCE and it's derived from that. But then they did not consider any other northern languages over here. Why would they not do that? They live in cultural proximity. Why would they not do that? So if you took all the languages of India and try to work backwards, you'll get a different answer. This goes back to the same thing in genetics. The words that we have, the grammar, the Sandhi rules that we have are common in northern India, southern India. All Indian scripts are from Brahmi. There's a common element over there. So most of our language has got similarity and there are few dissimilarities. Can we amplify the differences rather than look at the similarities? That is a question I constantly bring about when I show the underlying unity of the Indian civilization.
Nice. So I forgot to mention the code that you should type in is history-100. Put it in the chat when you're enrolling for the course. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. So enroll, put in that code history-100 and you'll get that scholarship. First come, first serve basis. Let me launch this quick poll. Just fill out yes, no, maybe if you're interested in the course. If you have questions, it'll make it easy for us to follow up with you. I don't think I mean, Dr. Vedam, what do you think about the word Hindu versus the other terms, right? That there's so much there. It comes up again and again. It's a mental block for some people. It's not accurate for other people. Bharatya, what is your thoughts on that?
I know that a lot of people agonize over these kind of issues, but I think the battlefields are far removed from these things. So I have not gone into either dating the Itihasas or the origin of Hindu or Sanatan Dharma or anything else. I have shied away from it because there is so much more material over there that talks about our identity, who we are as a people. It is not only the word Hindu that is our identity. We have a lot more. We have a lot more in terms of philosophy, knowledge systems, even in terms of the genetic composition and other things. So let's focus on these important issues. That's what I do in this course. Others who are inspired to do other things can go ahead and study origins of the word Hindu as one more identity.
Great. We talked about the maybe Western academics. How has your reception been with the Indian historians and academicians? Are they responding to your research? Has it been positive? That's from Jayanaji.
So I find a willingness now to engage. Early on, like I said, we have worked with the state of Telangana. Recently, we worked with the state of AP also, Andhra Pradesh, where we reviewed one more book for them. So we are finding a willingness now to engage, align with now that NEP 2020 is out there. It's the biggest buzzword in India right now. Everybody wants to write textbooks to align with NEP content. So people want to know, are we sufficiently aligned? What have we done wrong? Because nobody has a clue. Everybody's schooled in the Marxist way of thinking. So you don't even know, this has become the new normal. You don't even know where is the other narrative. Is there any other narrative? How do we change it? This is unfortunate reality in the textbook writers and the publishers and others who have no clue about these things. So I'm trying to help the few people who reach out to me to see how aligned they are with NEP 2020, what content they can bring in, and so on. So the reception in India has been, for the most part, I think it is growing now. There's a growing willingness to understand these issues. I have got some calls from some universities, obviously not all, some universities to come and give talks, and that's a positive sign of engagement. I'm glad for that. And hopefully the course that we have over here, hopefully we can have a book out of that and more engagement with more academics in India.
Nice. Yeah, that's kind of just following up with or answering Shailendraji's question about you're aware of some of these other groups and organizations, and we're starting to build that network and connective tissue, but you're choosing to participate in the way that you are. Yep. So we'll go with. Are you Michael Danino's work.
Yes, yes. Michael
Yes.
Denino is a very important scholar, and his works are exceedingly important. And we will be reading his works too. I give reading material out of Michael Danino's works, and in a couple of classes, we'll have his papers to read, and so on.
Great. Uh, Mike has a question back on what prompted people to seek cremation. Do we know the motivations behind that? And is it different in place to place, religious or cultural?
We don't explicitly look at the motivation for that as yet in this class. Maybe in an advanced class we'll do that. But my thinking would be the return back to the five elements. Given the Panchamahabhuta, we came from Panchamahabhuta, we go back to Panchamahabhuta, return the body to the elements so that the Atman can go on to its next journey. So you don't trap the Atman with its old remembrances. Once the body is gone, it has got no option but to move on rather than to stay. So there are several popular thinkings on why we do cremation, but I myself have not studied in depth on this.
Rameshi is so inspired he wants to help sponsor and support a student or somebody to help support the writing and the sharing of this. Thank you, Rameshi, for
Wonderful,
that.
wonderful.
Yamir Butt asks, are you doing any further research writings on these topics, and would you be looking for any research assistance? Are you in that process of looking for research assistance?
So you unfortunately I'm not that organized as yet to do that. I have a full-time job that provides my bread and butter. So this is my passion to come here and teach. And I am converting this course material slowly into a book. And at some point when I'm a little more organized in this, hopefully I will request the help from assistants. But I'm not there yet.
And maybe this course and this next quarter can be a step in that direction, because it seems like there is a lot of interest in, and I was actually thinking that myself in
Yes.
kind of a way, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe this course we can really take that step and love to support that function. And please enroll, take advantage of the scholarship, be a part of this. It's amazing, right? We're in webinar mode right now. You don't get to see everyone and it's not super interactive, but in the course you get to see everyone and there's dialogue, and it is it's a great atmosphere and environment. Even though it's on Zoom, it's still energy. It still gives me energy and enthusiasm. Trying to refute linguistics, archaeology, modern genetics. I'm gonna skip that one. We have HUA 4301. Let's look at the different courses in a different maybe offline. We're focusing on Dr. Raj Vedam's course right here. This criteria for scholarship is just first come, first serve. Just use that code history-100 when you're logging or when you're signing up for the course, and you'll get that scholarship. So what is the status of publishing scholarly works in academic journals? That's from
So
Rajivji, and he's an
So,
academic
so
himself.
yeah, it's critically important to publish. The problem is that many of the journals are controlled by a framework that will not admit this kind of thinking. So the table academic framework has only place for people who have the Marxist persuasion or the liberal academia persuasion, or the people of the colonial perspective persuasion, and others. So if somebody were to come and refute a long-standing theory like Aryan invasion, like I said, this is a received wisdom. The whole of academia is based upon these things. People have got their PhDs on these things. People are working in these areas. So if you go counter to that, your paper is not going to be published. Your paper is not, because it's a revolutionary theory. Our journals are equipped today to have evolutionary changes. If you say that I have referred to this paper, that paper, I have taken that theory, I found that I can extend it slightly in this direction, reviewers are now equipped to analyze that and publish this kind of work. If you go there and say that I made this revolutionary change out there are not enough people to review that and say, is this correct or not? So there's a reluctance in academia to publish any of these kind of works. So let me put it that way. So the process would be, we have to write books, and books, more people who take these courses, write blog articles. That's how something gets accepted into practice. Then we have academia willing to study these things and seeing what we can do next with it.
Yeah, and so it kind of feels like this course will provide a base and opportunities for collaboration to go in this direction. I hope
Yes.
so. I think you're aiming for that. And Rajiv ji, you please join us and be a part of it in that way. Um, Dej says they took both courses in the last 2 quarters. Dr. Raj Vedam ji has taken out the gunk that I was fed through the teachings, through my schooling, media, etc. I feel I am a learned man.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you for adding that, Teji. Thank you.
What data? Gauriji asks, what data sources are available for the correction of history that the current version has ignored? I mean, and as you mentioned, this course will have multi-dimensional factors. However, how has this been consolidated for
Yes, I'm
Reconstruction?
seeing that. So I think what we're going to do is we take the same data points that are used in today's history narratives. Like I said, it is the how you construct the curve. If I have 5 data points, I draw a curve and say that is the curve, then I'm saying there's a different curve that joins these same data points. And here are the reasons why this different curves should be accepted. That is what we're doing. In terms of ignored data points, I alluded to that already. We're going to be talking about astronomy. We are going to be talking about the internal evidence. Ever since Max Muller came and said these are all unreliable works, there is a fashion, it is fashionable today not to admit any of the Indic texts as containing data for historical purposes. The minute you try to do that, you'll be branded as a non-secular person and these kind of things. I failed to see the connection over there. So we will be looking at internal texts, the evidence offered by that. We'll critique that also. Data should be critiqued after all. Create data, methods, opinions should be critiqued. So we will take a look at the evidence from internal text also.
Yeah. Anandaji asks, what did we lose with Nalanda and Takshila and some of those other universities? Is there what is the scope of the loss even in, and you had that one image that showed the ruins of it was like 7 8
Right.
universities that are named and probably all had history and
Right, right. I think we can talk enormously on the subject. We don't know what we lost. We don't know how much we have lost irrecoverably, but much of the knowledge we know has existed. So at least in some form or the other, knowledge has existed. For example, today in India, you find a lot of practitioners of Ayurveda. Why is that? Because these texts have survived. Shushruta Samhita, Charaka Samhita, they've survived. Practitioners have been there in India all through various periods of time. So we are seeing that this part of ancient Indian wisdom continues to the present day. What about Indian mathematics? What about Indian astronomy? What about Indian sciences? They have not, because there's been a stop to the tradition. So we know that, yes, invasions have put a stop to some areas, and some areas we clearly see evidence that it is nurtured and has been growing.
Sherman G asks, what kind of groups are being organized, or what could normal people follow? You're on Twitter, right? You're active a little bit
Yes.
there, so maybe you could drop your handle in the chat, and people can follow you on Twitter and see what you're up to. But what are the other ways that people can just at least follow and stay up to date on what's going on?
So
As
I'm on Facebook, so please follow me on Facebook. Follow me on Twitter. I'm Raj Vedam One. I just put it over here at Raj Vedam One on Twitter. So please do follow. I'm also on QApp, the same name at Raj Vedam. So please follow me on QApp also. Also on Facebook. So I frequently add content in these forum on new data points that I'm uncovering and critiquing some of the narratives, including talks that I'm giving. I give information there. So please do that. Also, please do search for my name on YouTube. You'll find a lot of talks that have been published by various groups that are given that might give you additional content into some of the things that I'm saying.
great. And study at HUA. We're promoting what Dr. Vedam is doing, obviously. And in the email that will go out after this webinar, we'll share this replay with you so you have access to that. Anilji, Dr. Vedam mentioned that week by week, there's going to be different articles at different levels that he's going to post in a learning management system. So it's not just one text book that we're going to be using. So that's the approach to this course, and I think that gives the flexibility and allows learn at your own pace, and then bring what you can, and allows us to bring in all these interdisciplinary things going on. Satishri, thank you for letting us know about Ek Kadam or One Step Forward. That you got another speaking engagement lined up, Dr. Vedam. We'll follow up with that later. And again, as has been mentioned, this is one step in this long journey to reconstructing Hindu history. We got to write books, we got to write papers, we got to learn, we got to share. Yes, very good. Thank you for the supportive words. I'm starting to scroll through some of the questions. What about Al Basham, the book that Al Basham has written? What
Yeah,
is your take
it
on
is
that?
certainly a nice book to read, but understand it comes from a colonial perspective with a lot of the colonial uh, lenses, let's put it that way, and constraints. So anytime you read the book, you should be equipped enough to understand what can I take away from it and what are the things that I put big question marks on. So yes, do read them, read those books, but one will have to learn where to question those things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We, HUA is going to end up or aiming to, it's one of those midterm projects of starting our own publishing house, press house, but that's not on the near term horizon. Journal is a little bit different. I wonder, are there journals that are kind of in this space that are focusing, or how does, there's so many different academic and
There
peer
are
reviewed journals.
conferences that are like the Waves conference that is organized, and Rajiv Malhotra recently started the Swadeshi Indology conference. So there are conferences like this that cater to unheard voices like these, and that is where much of this material is published so far. Uh, in terms of journals, I'm not familiar, other than there is a Professor Jain, Professor Dr. Jain. I cannot remember his name completely, but I think there's a journal that has been started recently to support voices like this, but it's a general academic journal. I don't think it is catering to the voices that have been shut out.
Hmm. Okay. The total cost, well, this one course, if you get in early, should be $200. I see that Shradarji had a little issue with the discount code. I don't know if that is because it wasn't typed correctly. If you're having issues, just email contact. Put the email in the chat for who to email for support on enrolling. Hopefully, it's working out. I'll double check on that. Maybe we can get somebody else from the team to look into that right now if you're watching the webinar. What kind of planetarium software course? What kind of software are you using on the reconstructing the astronomy? And
Yeah,
that's kind of
yes.
the
So
interesting
we'll
question.
be learning a freeware software, something called Stellarium. I will, in one of the classes after astronomy class, I'll be helping the class to download the software, install it in their computers, and teach them how to use it, especially for Indian astronomy, with the Indian nakshatra names, Rashi names, and how to simulate some of the conditions using that software. So yes, that is something that you will be an outcome of this course. You'll be learning that.
Okay. Does the Max Mueller Library carry Sanskrit scriptures lost to India?
Well, there
For
is
Benji.
not just Max Miller Library. There are a whole lot of places. There is the Oxford Library, Cambridge, several universities in Germany, several universities in Switzerland, and places like this that have got Indian texts over there, Indian scripts, manuscripts, and other things, including if you were to go to the French Institute at Pondicherry. They are the world's largest collection of Shaiva Siddhanta manuals. Ever since the French landed up in Tamil Nadu, started invading those areas, they found out and got the largest collection of the Shaiva Siddhanta. They would go to a temple and just by either by force or bribe or kill the priest and take it. This is how they gathered it. So today, if you want to study Shaiva Siddhanta philosophy, you must go to French Institute of Pondicherry. They have the adhikara over that. Similarly, Bodleian Library in Oxford, other such places, they have the content. So we don't have much of that. We have got one or two classical libraries, like Saraswati Mahal is one, Bhandarkar Institute is another. It's like this, there are a few scattered in India, but their collections doesn't go back beyond Vijayanagar kingdom, maybe Sayana's time period, palm leaves and other such things. So, one would have to go to the European sources to get our own text. That's unfortunate reality.
That's a little disappointing. So some people are having issue with the code. Shiva Subramanianji said it worked for them. Please try again. Make sure you type it in correctly. If not, just shoot me an email and I'll make sure that we get you settled. If you are maybe, oh, whoops, wrong email address. hua.edu. We've had 47 out of 61 people fill out the survey. If you can find it real quick, just plug in if you're interested, not, or if you have questions still, hit the maybe. I don't think we have too many outstanding questions. But Mudgy says the lack of engagement is not just in the West; it's also in India as well. When the Western Indologists come to India, the Indian media refuses to print the Indian scholars' rebuttal.
Yes. Unfortunate. Unfortunate. The mind colonization is horrendous. Yes.
Oh, Pravinji asks about, does grammar determine the origin of languages? How is the origin of languages kind of
Okay.
constructed?
So the typical trajectory of a language, as we have seen, may not always hold true, but mostly, first you start with words. In a language, from grunting and from gestures and other things, it goes into words. Then the words are used perhaps to start talking, and you have literature coming about. The final end stage is grammar. Grammar giving a structure to all of these things and how things are to be done. So, in the intellectual development of a language, one would think grammar comes perhaps in the end stage, where you put everything together. So, I would suggest the same thing over here.
Mm-hmm. We're not doing audits for the course, just enroll in the course. I don't think Dr. Vedam is a harsh grader, but it's up to you to participate or not. Enrolled, very good. Okay. I think we're in the range of closing thoughts. My closing thought is, please enroll. This is exciting. I'm glad that you're a part of it. I hope we are gonna continue this. And as Dr. Vedam said, this is this two-part sequence, this two-core sequence is rolling. It's good. We're gonna continue it this quarter and next quarter, and then maybe future. We're gonna continue growing and building in different ways and hopefully different angles to get this information and knowledge out. But if that is it, Dr. Vedam, why don't you take us home with some closing thoughts and let us
So,
get us
so,
out.
so, so, yes, I encourage people to take the course if this is in your area of interest. Like I said, identity is critical. Not only your identity, the identity you give to your children. Right now, there's enormous disinformation in textbooks. The textbooks children are learning in schools that has got horrendous content on Hinduism, Hindu history, Indian history, and so on. So, a course like this will give you enough material to scientifically rebut some of the assertions out there. You can give your children a strong identity. That's critically important. Plus, you yourself have that. Tomorrow, you be the ambassadors of taking some of these things and blog articles and engagement on social media and so on. So the ideas continue to grow. It is only with such critical mass and more people start talking about these things, then change will come about. And why should we even bother? That's an important question, right? So how is any other thing going to help us in our day-to-day jobs and those kind of things? That's a question many ask. Don't forget, we are a civilization that placed a great value on truth. What is the truth? Can we understand that? The pramanas are the ones helping us to understand how to navigate the claims and understand what is true and so on. That is what we're doing. We're connecting back to the methods of our ancestors. Remember that in the world today, there are two main thought systems. One is, thou shalt seek, and we are seekers. The other main system is, thou shalt obey. There's a divine dictated law, and yours not to question why. Yours just to obey and die. So that is the other way of looking at things, where it's blasphemy if you go outside the set divine law. That's not conducive towards understanding any of these things. Today we are living in an era where there is a cancel culture, where there is leftist ideas have infiltrated the children's minds, Marxist ideas have infiltrated. Everybody's going around screaming. How do you even restore this to some sense of balance? Courses like this help to navigate, understand where we're coming from, and how to make these dialogues happen. So I encourage people to, yes, please do take this course.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Vedam. Thank you, everyone, for participating and staying until the end. We'll see you in the course and maybe at the next webinar. Namaste, dhanyavad.
Namaste. And once again, thank you to the two donors who are providing the scholarships, Nayananji as well as Rameshji. Greatly appreciate your enthusiasm for doing that. Thank you.